And good morning. I'm Dan Rogers, the Executive Director for the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for all of you for joining us in what is now an ongoing session of Business Smarts Online with the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. We want to welcome you all to this session. We are set to run until 10:30, though conscious we started a few minutes late, so thanks everyone that has joined us for your patience. And depending on Q&A, we'll get you out of here right around 10:30. We're pleased to have joining us this morning, no stranger to us. She's not only a member, she's also a service provider that helps us here at the Chamber, and it's been great to work for a number of years with Shawnee Love from LoveHR. A little bit more about Shawnee in just a little bit. We're talking about managing and engaging staff working remotely, particularly for those we haven't done this. We might have contemplated it previously, and there are challenges, opportunities that arise. The biggest one, Shawnee, to be honest, that we face is just how do you manage communications? It's a different way now working remotely on communication. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. I do want to thank all of you for joining, but all those members, and conscious there are those joining us that are not members of the Kelowna Chamber, but we're pleased to have you with us. If you want to ever talk about membership, we're pleased to do that. We want to thank particularly our President's Circle members. These are our pillar companies and organizations that allow us to do the good work that we're doing. We receive no government funding, but we have great member support, including from Interior Savings, BDO, LLP, the University of British Columbia, and MMP Accounting Consulting Tax LLP. So thanks to our President's Circle members and all our members. If you're not getting our newsletter, including our regular midweek update on COVID and all the updates, you can contact the Chamber. You can also check out our blog. You'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner, OK Kelowna, we've got this. We've grouped all the information and resources in one place on our website. So you can just click on that icon on our website and you'll find, as an example, all the previous webinars we've done. And like everything else, we like you to share. So we're going to go right into introducing our guest. Shawnee Love is the founder and lead consultant for LoveHR. No stranger to many of the Chamber members and others in the business community. Very active on a professional basis as well. Shawnee, I want to thank you for joining us. Assuming it looks like from your home to provide this update. I want to remind folks we are recording this session and we'll post this shortly on our website under our OK Kelowna. We've got this banner. The other component with this, if you aren't familiar with, well, and everyone is getting familiar with Zoom, there is a line in the menu bar at the bottom. It's Q&A. If you have a question around the issues that we're talking about today, please feel free at any time. We'll get to those as we continue over the next hour. Chat also works. That'll come directly both to Shawnee and myself, and we'll facilitate those questions to get as many answers to the questions that might be lingering as you look to deal with the situations that are facing us now with respect to a remote workforce, but potentially even in the longer term. Are there learnings here that we can adapt going forward that will make us stronger as we come through this session? With that said, I'm going to turn things over. Shawnee, again, welcome this morning to Business Smarts Online. And I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here, and good morning, everyone. And probably like many of you, I am working remotely from a home office. And so, as with probably many of you, anything can happen. Dogs can come running through, doorbells can ring, and children can be wandering in the background. And to be honest, I don't stage my location because, and I don't send everybody outside because I kind of wanted it to be real and just be really upfront about the challenges that we're all facing. I do have a slide deck that I'm going to share as we go through, but as Dan already mentioned, I am a big fan of questions and really trying to get answers for some of those. I think that's where the real robust learning comes from, and also it makes it interesting. So I'm going to pull up my slide deck and run through, I guess, the first couple slides and hopefully warm you guys up into asking your questions. And just as a very firm confirmation, one of the major things we will be talking about is effective communication during this time. In fact, if you only hear one thing today and you had to leave right now, I will tell you it is the most important thing about managing people remotely and in any time actually, but now more than ever. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up my slide deck, see if I can get it on the screen, and hopefully that worked. Great, thank you. So I just, I guess to show or recognize that probably like many of you, our business changed dramatically. We've been operating in the Okanagan and working with clients actually nationally from here since I want to say 2008 unofficially, but certainly since 2009, and are no stranger to working remotely. That is how I started, is working from my basement then actually. And gradually grew the business over the years. The Okanagan's been great to me and my family, and had the opportunity to move into an office in Kelowna a couple of years ago where things were really humming along and we had a great team. And then almost overnight, literally from March 15th to March 16th, when this all really broke for us, our business was almost immediately impacted. Projects being canceled, recruiting assignments that we help clients with being terminated, effective immediately, and really a lot of scrambling about letting employees, candidates, and companies know where things are at and trying to manage through this. So I guess I just want to say that we are really all experiencing this kind of dramatic change, and for some organizations it's an opportunity to ramp up and to do things differently. And I am trying to stay focused on that. And this is an opportunity to innovate as much as it feels challenging and scary. It also, in these kinds of times, there are some really creative things happening in our community, and I've been really excited to see what some of our clients are talking about and some of the organizations we're seeing. It's also really scary, and not only is it scary for us as business owners, but it's scary for our staff. And I think that's where I like to start here is to say that we call it working remotely, but the reality is that's not quite what it is. We're all trying. It's a Band-Aid solution in many cases. We're all trying to do our work while being sent out of our workplaces and having to scramble in a lot of ways to figure out a new way of operating, interacting, and still serving our customers and getting the work done. And I had this conversation with a couple of clients, and I think it's important to just say this here that in my experience, I would say prior to this, on average, you could expect productivity about 80% of the time from employees. Recognizing vacations and meetings and, water cooler breaks and sick days and all of that over the course of a year, if you take a big step back, a normal, competent, average employee is working really productively about 80% of the time. And that is a completely unrealistic expectation today. We're finding people overwhelmed, completely ill-equipped to deal with this. And so, just honestly, I'm talking about 40 to 50% productivity as this is unfolding. And we're getting a little better day by day, but it's not that unrealistic to think that productivity is going to go down that significantly. And I mention that because I have heard, some managers beating themselves up saying, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to help. And most of us aren't counselors, so we're just doing our best with what we have. And I think, again, I'm going to talk about this a bit more, but giving ourselves and our staff a bit of grace is really important. So what I want to do now is jump to the first thing, which is in normal times. And I think that's important to reflect on that, in normal times, if you were going to have somebody work remotely, we would have, there's well-known best practices out there. Typically, you'd have a policy for remote work that would cover off, schedules and who gets to do it. You'd probably have some kind of agreement in place regarding, what the company provides, how the employee should be working from remote, in a remote environment, what the interaction will look like, what needs to get done, what has to still be done in the office. A lot of this information would be already thought about and planned, right? You'd have consultation with your IT regarding, do they have the technology, the security, the access? And of course, even as we use some of these different technologies successfully, we also hear horror stories of being hacked or having information and privacy breached because we're using tools and technology in new creative ways. Gotta love us for that. But that isn't always set up to have the levels of protection that they need to. And usually, of course, in normal times, you also have some kind of planned transition. And, oftentimes you might even have IT go out to your employee's house and say, hey, let's set you up. Let's make sure that it's ergonomic and it's well equipped. And, in those circumstances, people usually make that transition successfully. Now, not everybody's equipped to work remotely, of course, but usually people, if they have the time to prepare and some of the tools that are provided to them, they can operate successfully remotely. Of course, as I say, it is time for a new normal. COVID pretty much killed the new normal. We're no longer, having an opportunity to transition successfully and carefully and thoughtfully. Instead, we're basically unceremoniously shipped overnight, right? And so people are struggling. And of course, let's not forget, not only are they attempting to work from home, but they're also, in some cases, caring for people in their families who are, not well or just needing to be safe and isolated. They have children who they may now have to be dealing with. And of course, homeschooling, which is an entirely different adventure as a parent, let me assure you. And let's not also forget multiple technology going at the same time. And that's really affecting bandwidth for businesses and for employers, for employees. I've actually been on a Zoom meeting where my bandwidth pretty much crashed because both of my kids had meetings at the same time. And I'm fortunate because I actually happen to have enough technology for all three to be using it. But what about when you're making decisions on who gets the computer in the house? Because we didn't have enough time to allocate or issue computers or technology for our employees before they went and worked from home. So I guess it is time for a new normal. And I guess what I come back to is really, let's get back to basics. Let's really think carefully about, how and what and who is going to be working remotely and then build from there. So to start off, assuming you did not have people working remotely, what are those basics? I think the first thing I recommend with employers is to make sure you know who is where. That sounds silly, but I know for a number of people in the chaos of like I said, that things changed overnight, March 15th, and then the weeks that followed, there wasn't really clear discussion about who was able to work from home, what technology they would need to work from home, if it's even possible, and who would still be coming into the office, how much office work would be needed. And I go back to that basics and really say, who's where, have a list of who's in the office. Is there a rotating schedule of who's in the office so that people do get that chance to stay connected or come back in and collect mail or just grab supplies, frankly. I still encourage to have ground rules, teaching your staff about and making sure that they understand about security, confidentiality, levels of access. Even leaving your computer open while you step away from it in your house can be risky in some environments or some organizations. So, spending some time talking about privacy and confidentiality, access, security, etc. And also about the etiquette. Just having conversations, I think we've probably all seen on Facebook or on Instagram some of those hilarious videos of people doing their first Zoom call and forgetting to take off their morning shower towel or not wearing pants because they think nobody notices, but jumping up for the doorbell and everyone sees them run by in their boxers. And I've seen some pretty funny examples and it makes you laugh, but it's certainly a good reminder to go out there and to get ahead of some of those things. And as employers, to be talking about, what is acceptable and what is the kind of behavior and image and reputation that we want to uphold. I mentioned to you today, I'm being casual and really showing what it looks like here. But I also, I recognize that in my business, we do tend to be a little bit more casual. We get really close and intimate with our clients. So it's acceptable to be in our more, I guess, regular day clothes rather than potentially dressed in a business suit every day. So, and we've had those discussions as a team and certainly with our clients are encouraging the same. Another part of the basics is, of course, the technology needs to work. And I know that has been a source of endless frustration for clients and employees alike. And not only the technology, so having the hardware, but just understanding the tools. And it has been a huge learning curve for many, many people who never had the opportunity to use Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting, which are, by the way, all great tools and technology that have really stepped up, in my opinion. I've seen nothing but impressive response and upgrades and improvements coming out of those particular service providers. Another one, Microsoft Teams, they've done a really good job about getting ahead of this and really trying to shore up their tools and provide good training. But again, people who haven't used it before now suddenly are having to learn how to use it. So part of that productivity of their normal day is just spent figuring out how to set up a meeting and how to click through and how to manage, multiple people. And in fact, I hosted a board meeting we did not too long ago. And one of the big discussion points around it was, how do we make sure everybody's heard when, you have 15, 20 people in a room and people are all talking at once, how difficult that is. But at the same time, how do you make sure and then keep the meeting ending at a reasonable time? So we're starting to build, even in our own different organizations, etiquette and protocols around this new kind of meeting and new kind of interactions. I think it's also really important to recognize and know that not everybody is able to work remotely. Not every position is able to work remotely. And having conversations with individuals about, what is possible, and then articulating a plan outside of that. So much of our ability to work remotely is understanding who we need to be in touch with and who we have to contact and how we have to contact them. And I've had a couple awkward situations come up where somebody who's a normal go-to, because they aren't in a position to work from home or due to other circumstances surrounding COVID, have not been able to work. And nobody told anybody in the team that. And so, part of this discussion, without breaching privacy, of course, is making sure that all of the people who are involved in your organization know what's happening with each of the other positions. And it sounds like a simple thing to do, but in my experience over this last month, and I guess what are we at, 5-6 weeks now, because it's evolving so fast, it almost feels like a daily objective to get out there and get in front of who's where, when, and how do we keep them all in the loop on what is important to know. So I guess this is the basics. Before I move into what we're really here to talk about, which is how to keep engaging with people while they're in this new reality, are there any questions that have come up?
Nobody's taken advantage of it yet, Shawnee, but just a reminder that those that are on, and we have a good crowd this morning, the Q&A bar at any time if you want to pose that, and we will get to all those questions in the time that we have set aside. If we don't get to your questions that you pose, we'll certainly follow up afterwards. So you can use those participants that are with us this morning. You can use the bottom Q&A to type out a quick question for Shawnee. Or you can use the chat. We'll get both of those, and we'll get to those after. We've also had some questions that have come in prior to this when they heard the session, so I can share some of those when we get through your slide deck.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep moving then. So if you've got the basics in place and you've made it through the first couple of weeks, really the next part of this is how do we keep people engaged and on the, the nice green button as opposed to the feeling distressed or upset side of this. And, really once the sort of initial excitement and adrenaline and fear, chaos of all of this broke, and then people got to the new reality. In a lot of cases, my comment on back to basics, you've already moved through that already. You've covered a lot of those things. And so now we're in this space where we're almost in a holding pattern or a limbo, and people are working and trying to stay positive and trying to stay engaged. And that's really what I want to focus on now. So this is really the big slide of the big points that I have. I am going to talk through each one of those and give some examples. And of course, if you do have questions, please bring them forward, because this is where I think the real interesting, meat of this discussion will come from. So Dan, there you are. It's communicate. And how do we communicate with our staff in these new situations? I'll tell you when this all broke and we were having conversations with employers about how to handle it. my recommendation initially was have a personal call with every single person every single day for the first couple of weeks, at least until we can get everybody feeling comfortable in the new reality. And that's a big commitment. I fully recognize for employers that have 100 and 200 people. You may need to delegate some of those responsibilities to your supervisors and your management, but it is so important to be the leader that is connecting with your staff. And the way to do that is to get in front of it, and it can't just be done via email. I'm a firm believer in that. With all of our technology, the face-to-face and or the voice contact is really critical. So for initially to get people through it, to ease their mind, to ensure that they know that there's a plan and that you are the leader and you're going to lead them through this, that initial communication, in my opinion, has to be done either face-to-face via something like this or over the phone. And I am encouraging, daily check-ins with people. I certainly, I've talked to employers about having a morning huddle, which you could do as a big group. In some cases, I've talked about morning and evening huddles and debriefs at the end of the day, multiple check-ins individually in either groups, individual sort of pair groups, or depending on the size of your organization, whatever makes sense. You evolve your communication as we go through this, but the day-to-day initial contact, I can't emphasize enough, especially for people who are working. Even a quick note. And we have so much technology at our fingertips, right? We can use these kinds of things, but we also have our chats and our messengers and our texts. And I've seen employers with phones and email and video conferencing, and they're all going at the same time and using different tools. And I think the one message I have for employers and leaders here is that it's really important to meet your employees in the technology and the communication tool that they feel comfortable at. That way, it just eases their ability to focus and be productive on the other aspects. They're learning so much. We're learning so much. If you can find out, and I would literally make a list, all my people, where they're located on each given day and how they best like to communicate. And then, I would set up a time with each person over the course of a day or over a week, depending on what you've evolved into. And I would make a point. That would be my job, is to get out in front of that. And I have had this conversation with employers, and I've had a couple of them say, but Shawnee, I need to be out focusing on selling. I don't have the time to do that. And I understand that dichotomy because I live it too. But I'm also recognizing that if you want your people to be engaged and productive, and if you want to be able to serve your customers successfully, also communicating with your staff needs to be a priority. And if you aren't able to do a daily check-in or a daily conversation, then set up a rhythm that works for your business and just make sure your staff know. And so, it's great to do random extra conversations, but make sure your staff know when they can rely on hearing from you. And that's where, we start to see some real, I call it your relationship piggy bank, frankly. But it's this idea that when you tell people what you're going to do and then you do it, you start to build that relationship piggy bank. You build your credit or your trust in there. And we need that right now. The more you had in that relationship piggy bank before this broke, the more you have to draw against, because there's sure going to be days when you aren't at your best and you aren't able to be as the perfect leader for them. So the more we can do, the more we can follow through on the things and the commitments we make, the better we are equipped for the future. And just for, as I said, to use and leverage that trust that we've built so that people will give us the grace that we need sometimes as well. I talk about as a next point here, building connections. Part of your conversations can't just be about the work. Certainly they have to be. Most of them have to have work conversation, but it's also the opportunity to remember and focus on some of the personal side, because your employees need to know you care. And that's a part of them feeling engaged, is trusting that you as their leader care enough about them to ask how they are, how their family is, how they're finding all of this. And I know that there's a little bit of resistance with some employees to initially say that, but what I find is if when the clients I work with show that they truly do want to know, that employees, it's almost a sense of relief. They're grateful that you ask and that you care. And so, and again, those connections, those conversations can talk about, and frankly, if you're like me, sometimes you don't always in the moment remember all the questions you want to ask. So I'll build out my question list. Maybe Monday I'll talk about how their general, effectiveness is as it relates to using the tools. Day 2, I might be talking about workflow and workload and how they're feeling about it. Day 3, I'm going to ask about things like their mental health or their family's physical and mental health, what they're doing for fun or to stay well. Any plans for the weekend can be a conversation on a Thursday or Friday. So again, we're balancing that, work and the emotional connection that our staff need from us. And then the next piece I talk about is providing structure for the day and structure for the work. And so this goes a bit back to basics about having some kind of etiquette and protocol, but as much as you can, and I realize it's evolving for all of us, but as much as you can provide, hey, every Wednesday we're going to be doing this kind of update, or, we will know on this date and we'll circle back with you. Making sure that people talk about things like, hey, if we're going to have a team meeting, everybody needs to be available at this time, and being clear that, maybe we have core hours rather than saying everybody has to work from 9 to 5, or, you might be able to flex a bit just to recognize that, and this is leading into my next one, that people are dealing with so many different aspects of what's happening in their life in and around the home. And as I said, even that example, it literally happened to me. We had 3 meetings happening at the same time, my kids and I, because 2 had their teachers had class going on, and then there was me. So, perhaps if I was in a situation where my boss needed me to meet at that time, I might be able to go back and say, hey, can we shift that meeting to an hour later or an hour before, so that I'm not in conflict with my kids' time. And that's where, I come back to give flexibility and offer grace. I can't emphasize this enough for yourself and for others. Flexibility takes a lot of different forms in organizations, but particularly around timing and structure of work and tools. The more that we can see how that's happening, the more I'm hearing as we go about employers really being creative in that front, and then offering that grace. I come back to, so many people are overwhelmed and stressed out, and even with all the tools in the world, we all have our moments when this becomes too much. And it was interesting. As this was unfolding, I had some employers calling me March 16th in a panic, and other employers I didn't hear from. And then, 2-3 weeks later, the ones that had been calling me early on seemed to start to get into a rhythm. But those who were calling then were in early April suddenly feeling stressed out. And so we all reach this point of being able to deal with, or not. We all reach our own personal max and our organizational max at different times. And being able to give some grace around that, and recognizing the same in our employees, that, everybody has different coping skills and mechanisms, and providing some support. Frankly, as employers, we're not counselors, but one of the things I've been sending out to some of my clients is, hey, here are some great online tools for your staff. You can try and, direct them to some of these, because we aren't counselors, but these are tools for them to use. I see a couple of questions coming in.
Well, there's a couple of questions and a couple of chats, and sorry to interrupt, and we'll
please
continue with the last ones. But I think we have a couple from the BCS-PCA that is applicable to the second bullet from the bottom that talks about incorporating fun, and the reps talking about the daily huddles and ensuring that there's some levity and humor.
Yes.
Incorporating Fun Fact Fridays. So some thoughts around those areas. It's interesting because this is such a serious issue. The challenges are significant. The pressures are there.
Yeah.
Incorporating that and having a structure, if you could comment about that, and you're probably going to get to that under the be fun component, but if you could, given the chat that comment has come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things you have to be able to smile a little bit and take yourself away from this situation every now and then, frankly. And we all have our own ways of self-care. So for me, part of that is humor. And I have been enjoying some of the things that I've seen come up. One of the very early examples is, of course, you can change your background when you have Zoom meetings. I don't know if people know that. My children found it before I did, but after I found it, I saw an article come up on, and forgive me, I don't remember the website or the company at this point, but there was one company that had its moment of fame when they actually had dress-up competitions for the various backgrounds, and they, one person dressed up in their best Star Trek uniform because they had a lovely background of a Star Trek command ship, and they actually had competitions in their team meetings regarding, who could dress up the best in their background and who could have the most fun background. So, and I've also seen examples of dress up your pet. Poor pets. Mine would be shamed if I put any clothes on her, but certainly I've seen examples of people, putting on their best dresses or suits for meetings, or their Halloween costumes, or, as I said, dressing up their pets, sharing recipes. I personally am not a huge fan, but I've seen the reintroduction of chain mail through email, and people sharing everything from great food recipes, as I said, to great ideas for crafts for kids or themselves, and a real reintroduction. People sharing pictures of their failed baking. Sharing articles and different tidbits to sort of make people laugh, and actually making that a part of our group huddles and our meetings. Again, I actually, one of the things I do want to wrap up on, but since it came up, is during this time, and again, we're not counselors, I know, but as leaders in organizations, not only is it incumbent upon us to practice our own self-care, but it's also a responsibility to help our employees and remind our employees on how they can handle and practice self-care. And yes, that is everything from seeking out the mental and physical support and health that you need from your various doctors and service providers, but it also includes daily practices like taking time to laugh, or taking time to go out for a walk with the family, or cook together, have a meal together, watch a program together. I think that the realm of self-care is it's certainly, you're able to find information on it almost anywhere you look online. It's very, very present. And so different people practice their self-care in different ways, but encouraging that as an employer, I think it's not only important, but it's just smart business, because we want our employees to be able to work and continue to work, and we want them to be able to come back from this experience able to work in hopefully, a condition where they're healthy physically and mentally. And I know for some people that is a struggle, and that's entirely separate and completely independent from people who, by the way, are working in homes that maybe aren't safe, or working in environments where, the stress has created other kinds of challenges for them that is beyond what we would expect or experience. So, part of it is being fun, and part of it is just making sure, and this is maybe, a bit of a blend, that coach and support. Encouraging people to have fun is one kind of coaching we can offer, but also this reminder about, making sure people are practicing self-care. And I always say you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So, somebody sent me something the other day about all these different ways that you could practice self-care. And, just as a quick list off the top of my head, again, it depends on the person and what they like, but, you can do a workout. By the way, online workouts are incredible right now. They're free. You can get them from just about everywhere. Meditation, again, same thing. There's tons of great online resources for meditation. Good books, there's book clubs springing up online. You have people out there with great videos, inspiring videos, learning videos, virtual tours of museums if you want to travel and you can't right now and you just want to get out of your head and go experience something new. So, there's lots of creativity happening in our world right now. That's one of the great things about a crisis, right? It suddenly breeds invention and innovation, and we're seeing that. And so as people in general, forget employer or employee, but as people, the opportunities to explore and to find ways to take good care of ourselves are really endless. You can do yoga, you can journal, all of the color, all of those standard things we've heard. go for a run, go for a hike in the forest. That's a big one for me. And also, remember, again, I go back to basics. Are you eating healthy meals? Are you getting good sleep? Are you remembering to turn off social media? Because God knows, it can be a great resource, but it can also just bring you down. And I always talk about to my kids is the basic things is, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you getting good exercise? And are you getting good downtime or playtime? And it, I call it playtime with kids, but frankly, we all need that time to play, laugh, joke, have a little fun. We've seen virtual meetings happening amongst friends, team happy hours. I know that's another way where I've seen people be a little more playful, where you would go for drinks on a Friday. Instead, we're having, a glass of wine in the home. Certainly some of our different organizations are trying to find different ways that work for them, that make sense for them to keep those people engaged. I think you notice here I have realistic expectations set. I think I started out with that, talking about, there is going to be a lower productivity level, and we ought to just acknowledge it and work through it, as opposed to being stressed or upset with anybody about it, including ourselves. And then the last bullet I wanted to say on here, and then again, we'll go back to some questions and some chat, but is this idea of appreciating. And recognizing this is not normal times, and people have, for some, this is a monumental shift to move out of their office and regular day-to-day time and job into a working remote situation. And there's no better time. And again, it's building that relationship with them to let them know that you really do appreciate their commitment, their willingness to do so. Because believe me, I have lots of employers calling me saying, my employees won't come to work. There are so many subsidies out there, they don't need to work. And I've made it as safe as I can. So how do I get them to come to work? So if you have people that are working through this, sticking with you, please remember to appreciate and recognize and thank them for all that they're doing and all that they're working through in order to keep, the organization moving, to keep serving customers or patients or clients or whatever you call them. It's really something really incredible. And I hope that when we get all through this, we can look back and really reflect on how amazing of a response, for the most part, we've been able to accomplish as groups and as teams as we go through this. Should we look at any other questions here, Dan?
Do you have a few more slides, sorry, or are you?
Well, my few more slides, yeah, I'll keep going and then we'll give some time at the end. My next slide is really just a reminder that old ways don't open new doors. And as much as this is, a terribly stressful time, I think, and, I keep on hearing the word unprecedented. Frankly, if I hear it again, I'm going to start a drinking game with it, because everybody's using that term, right? But just as, it is a difficult, challenging time, it is also a time when we can create and innovate and do things new and learn new skills and new technology. And for the most part, I've been seeing organizations certainly innovating and employees, making really big changes that they wouldn't probably be willing or interested in normal times. So that's something I think for all of us to be proud of. It's an unprecedented, there's that word again, unprecedented time of innovation and invention. And I wanted to before I guess get to questions, one of the other things I would like to ask of people is, and this is a self-care tool and practice that I practice with myself, my children, my family members, my employees, and certainly with people and employees of my clients that I work with, is thinking about and being grateful for, one thing, whether it be daily or weekly or even through this crisis. When you can start to find that one thing or multiple things that you can be grateful for, you can start to shift your perspective from one of fear and distress into more of a positive and more focused approach on how we can get through it. And so, in this session, if you have things you're grateful for, I'd love for you to share them, and I'd be happy to share with the group. And similarly, if you don't feel like sharing or you're not there yet, really reflecting on, over the coming days, what you can feel grateful for and what we have to be grateful for, because there really is so much still. And, Yeah, I guess I'll leave on that. It is a tool for self-care as well, to practice gratefulness. And I feel quite strongly that it's only through those kinds of practices, as well as, again, our emphasis on communication, the one big takeaway, that we're really all going to be able to get through this together, like we keep talking about.
Well, thanks, Shawnee. And if you can stop sharing your screen, and we'll bring it back up, and we'll get to some of the chat discussions and some comments, some useful comments being provided through the chat, giving examples of organizations that have responded. Again, for those that have joined us, you can use the Q&A bar at the bottom to pose a question to Shawnee. We've got a couple in there. I had a couple in advance, we'll cover that. But just to follow up on something that you had earlier said to start it off for the next 20 minutes or so, obviously creating that positive environment, those principles that you talked about good communication, that's a consistent business theme.
Yes.
Is it more important now with a remote workforce, or are there unique aspects of doing that with a remote workforce that people need to be aware of? Or are you just a more frequency and realize that more frequency of engagement creating an environment, and that's in conflict of, I want to increase productivity because I'm facing fiscal challenges. So
yeah,
specifically with that shift now because of the necessity to have that remote workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about communication in regular business anyway, because I think we all think we do it well. And I know myself too. I think I'm better than I am, frankly, at communicating. You often make assumptions that people understand or know where to go, and find out afterwards that they don't. And so I guess I think that in a crisis, which this is, no matter what, it's important to communicate more. And that realistically, if you want to have any measure of productivity, communication is one of the foundational aspects of that. And, frankly, I've seen that in the fires and the floods and previous recessions and previous, issues with organizations just having their own individual crises, that communication becomes important. And if you, of course, we do need to get out and generate business, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to provide or deliver on the services or products that you want to deliver and that you've committed to delivering if you don't have really good communication through times like this. And, there's smarter people than me out there talking and training people in communication. But, when I talk about communication at any time, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be clear, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be complete. So you need to be able to provide people the full story. And if you can't, and, sometimes in a crisis, let's face it, you don't have time to spend giving all the details and the underlying rationale. And that's where we rely on the trust and the relationship that we have with our employees to say, hey, I can't tell you right now because this challenge I'm facing, but I promise I'll sit back and we'll debrief or we'll talk through this at this point. And so that's where that follow-up, follow-through becomes so important as a leader, doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And the trust and the grace that you've built over time will buy you some grace and some time when you come into an issue that you just can't deliver like you said you would. So, I think communication is important all the time. And I think with all these tools that we have and all the training and all the knowledge, you think we do it better. But I still realize that, we get busy, things happen. We understand there's a million obstacles or barriers to good communication. Right now, it's important to take the time and to really circle back and make sure what you think you're telling people is understood.
We have a few questions, Shawnee, and I'll preface that we have a few Business Smarts webinars coming up that are around the HR. Next week, we're going to talk about labor law in the age of COVID. So some of this kind of broach, I'm sure your clients are raising some of these issues. The question from one of the participants, how do we address the obligation under WorkSafe to ensure our team members have a safe working environment when they're not in control, when they're at home? So
yeah, good question. I've actually had that come up a few times. I think in general, and again, maybe WorkSafe's going to call me after this and say you're wrong, but But in general, if somebody is working in their home, there's a presumption that it is a relatively safe environment for them. And, this is separate from people who are experiencing domestic abuse and domestic violence. Obviously, that's an entirely different situation and story, and I know employers are dealing with that. But let's assume, the environment is not affected by that, and you are in your home office. You probably don't have the right chair, and you might not have your stand-up desk, and you might not have your nice little wrist and hand mouse properly set up. But as it relates to, the dangers that you might experience from another office environment, I think in general, my understanding is a home is perceived to be more safe because it's better known to us as well, and we know the hazards and the risks associated with it. Candidly, if this was to go on a very long time, months and months, I think we would need to be paying and spending more time focusing on the things that we go back to basics and we say we should do, which is plan a home office, do a visit, make sure that it's properly set up and well equipped. I think, the idea that this is a temporary, Band-Aid solution, as I said, in order to keep people working, that there will be a little bit of grace given. But at the end of the day, if somebody can't work safely in their home, we want them to tell us. And I have a couple of employers who, for employees who don't have space or technology or whatever the reason is that they can't work at home, they are still offering them office space because then that employee is working alone and pretty much safely isolated anyway because most others aren't there. Or as I mentioned in a little bit earlier, is staggering when people come in. So, and obviously increasing the cleaning in the office so that we have that sort of balance of safety as well. So really it's, the one thing about this I keep on coming back to is you have to be individually creative. You can't just say this is our system and everybody's doing it and we won't want to think about it. It's every single person is getting some special attention to make sure, and that's part of that communication, right? Is making sure it's working for them. Ask the question, are you safe? What do you need? How can I help? Are there obstacles? How can we work through them? And so this communication, it becomes more of a collaboration than perhaps we're used to. But of course, our employees are experts in their own homes, right? So hopefully they can offer that.
We had a question that's almost a comment that came in through the Q&A with respect to, is this, in the broader terms, a great reset of how work is conducted? And I'm not sure if you're having those discussions with clients. They're in a bit of crisis management. So my workforce is remote because they can't come, but there will become a time. Are you giving guidance for small businesses to say, use this an opportunity to do long-term planning, to work out some kinks so that you have some flexibility? There are some personal gains, I suspect, right, with remote work, not the least of which you don't have to get in your car every single day or to move back and forth or burn some of that. So your day starts at a time and ends at a time, and you're immediately into. So are you giving guidance? Are you getting questions around that from your clients of thinking long-term about what your work environment might look like?
Absolutely. I mean,
feedback that you get from that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been that ebb and flow, as I've said. Initially, for people, it was the initial shock and the fear and the, how do I manage this? And now we are starting to have more conversations about, okay, if this is a reset, what does it look like in the future? Everything from what do I want my business to be? I had a plan before, but maybe I'm rethinking it now, or I'm rethinking how we work, or how much we work, or where we work. Do I need all that office space comes into question. Am I able to do things differently? And so, yeah, I mean, we are having those conversations. Personally, as much as I think this is a stressful time, it is an opportunity to rethink how you do things. The barriers to change that normally exist have almost been, I don't want to say eliminated because there's still some, but they've definitely been reduced. And so, and you have people, especially our valuable team members who, if they aren't, working on the front lines and going full tilt, they may have time to be reflecting on this as well. So you can really engage with the entire group to talk about, hey, is there an opportunity to do this differently? What would that look like? How could we do it? And, I've actually been blogging a little bit, trying to maybe give a bit of a different perspective that, when times are slowing down and or tough, are great opportunities to think about, what do you invest in? What kind of training are you doing? It's a great time to change a policy or a procedure, to rethink what you're going to be doing. These are definitely times to do that. As much as we're scrambling to build business, you can't always be doing and calling and out there on the phone for some organizations. The flip is what can we can be thinking about, what can we be learning how to do. And, I see employees willing to talk about that in a different way than they might have, because they just didn't need to. It's I always talk about, and actually I've talked about this with many clients, and I've got an article coming out in a Professional Association magazine very shortly that I've written about, underlying any change is really an effective change needs a compelling reason. And this is a compelling reason. It's, in some cases for businesses, it's survival, but it's also thriving and being around in, 3 months, 3 years, what do we want our business to look like? And people are looking at that differently than they ever have before. And you think about, just as one last quick thing, I have in the past thought, gee, wouldn't it be great to go and do a health appointment with my doctor over phone or video? And had asked my doctor and other people I know in that profession, hey, what are the likelihoods? And been told, no way, why would we go there? And yet here we are, literally 6 short weeks after this started, and many doctors have gone to that. And so, you think that this is a profession that's been around for a very long time and would be, as much as they're innovating on the medicine and the health side, the sort of standard GP visit has been very typical for years. And yet all of a sudden, here we are. And so it just proves to me that the time is ripe for innovation and invention and recreating ourselves. And we're talking about that every day with different organizations, for sure.
So those that have joined us, we've got about 7 to 10 minutes to go. We started just a little after 9:30, so we'll go to about 10:33:30 or somewhere therein. So we'll try to cover off a few issues. We had a couple of questions that were posed, Shawnee, in advance, so I want to get to those. One more that's online, but if you want to get a Q&A in, those that have joined us, please do so by the Q&A bar. There's a question that probably for us is the Chamber offer members access to some sort of EAP, free counseling resources. So we have through the Chamber group insurance, and those members that subscribe to that can extended health have the EAP as a component of that benefit. Any guidance you would give, and by the way, I will plug it a little bit before we finish. We are doing a session on wellness
good.
With Iwana from Healthy Transitions. We've
Great.
been before. She's excellent. It'd be great for your employees, but I'll plug that when we get it. Any guidance you're giving to those that might not have extended health coverage on the employee assistance or resources that folks could go to that they could get that when they start to potentially identify where staff or might be having challenges because they're feeling isolated or not connected that they once were?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess, first of all, we have been compiling resources for clients of, tools online for the most part, of places where you can go and get good information and support outside of an EAP. That's always, as an HR consultant, HR practitioner for the last 30 years, when you're in HR, employees in distress will come to you, right? And so, that if we don't have an EAP, which by the way, I usually do encourage strongly and highly my clients to have where they can afford it or the option is there. If they don't have that though, then some of these online tools that have been, coming out over the last few years are great resources. And, we, as I said, provide and share those according to what the various employees' needs are. Not to self-plug because I'm not a counselor, but I definitely have been working directly with employees, hearing them out. In some cases, as much as businesses are thinking about what they want their future to be, employees are using this as a reset button to think about, what's important to them in their career and how do they get there as well. And so some of that, again, not counseling, but discussions of where to find good tools, who to talk to, where to go, what are some good processes to get there. those are things that, if you have HR in your organization, chances are they can offer. And for companies that we work with, that's often a call that we get, and we provide that service to employees directly. I think the big thing, is again, getting in front of this as employers. As I said, we sent out some resources to the employers we work with and said, hey, if you're stuck, you can send this out to your employees. And we're not necessarily saying every employee is going to pick it up, but what ends up happening is the employees that recognize it in themselves may, and then part of that communication conversation that I had, day after day or week after week, asking about mental health, how you're doing, and having some of those tools at your fingertips and passing them on. I think that's really part of our job now as leaders of organizations.
Yeah, there's a comment, and thanks, Ellen, for reminding. The Canadian Mental Health Association locally has developed what they're calling Discovery College, but they're providing webinars. They, like us, are providing webinars. We're trying to get as much information to members to help them through this challenge on anxiety. So you can just check out the Canadian Mental Health Association. And our newsletter, actually, our COVID update today talked about the Canadian Business Resilience Network, CBRN. And we mentioned this morning in our newsletter an update that goes out that there's a national webinar on helping create better work environments and dealing with mental health issues. So there are a couple opportunities even online that are available. So thanks for that. There's also, obviously the crisis line that's available. We had a question before that came in with respect to balancing, and this might be a legal question, but I'm assuming you likely will get these with your clients around, and the example was a part-time employee who is accessing CERB, the emergency fund, who then gets a call from an employer, we need you to come back to work. And we can create social spacing, we can create an environment, and the employee says, A, I'm not comfortable coming back to work because of the perceptions personally, I believe, a healthy work, and B, I like the 2,000 I'm getting in the short term, so why do I want to come? What guidance do you give employees around that? Conscious you're not a lawyer, and we might get into this deeper when we have a rep from Pusher Mitchell next week, but I'm assuming you're getting those types of calls.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been the biggest frustration for many employers. They're following IHA guidelines or the guidelines of their various health authorities. They're responding as the requests come in from employees, and actually having employees refuse to come to work because they're pretty comfortable where they're at. And I actually just had that conversation yesterday. So, I'll leave the legal side to the lawyers because, I work great with Pusher Mitchell, and frankly, there's lots of law firms lots of lawyers in town and around the country I work great with. But I guess, I come back to, you can't change somebody's underlying beliefs. And if they're truly fearful for their safety, then honestly, I would not want to put them in that situation. I recognize that there are some people who feel that way, and this whole situation has, as a side note, really exacerbated mental health concerns. And to the point where, I go out, I'm a big fan of being in nature, and I've seen people yelling at people walking or riding by, and that's just abnormal behavior. You don't see it every day. So it's just obvious that people are struggling from a mental health perspective. So if somebody's truly fearful, and again, we're communicating with them, we're going to have conversations, you're going to be hearing some of that information, I think then really we want to respect that and recognize that. It doesn't mean we can't be clear in our communications with them that we have been and created a safe space. And certainly if the record of employment that you would issue when they aren't coming back to work, it's not due to shortage of work, but it would be rather a personal leave that they're taking. And I think that is probably the most common recommendation that I'm giving, is that if somebody's truly afraid and fearful, and has said that they can't come into work for whatever belief system, then that's an appropriate response. If It's a little different though when, you know, somebody says, I'm pretty comfortable getting CURB and why would I work? You know, I mean, I was actually really happy to hear that the government had modified CURB, because initially when it came out, CURB was you get the $2,000 a month and you're not allowed to work at all, which of course immediately had people saying, you know, employers saying, well, now I can't offer work because I don't want to be the employer that causes them to lose their entire month's benefit for a day here or there. When the government modified that to allow them to earn up to $1,000, I think employers were pretty happy about that, because they now had the ability to call people back in, and there was this opportunity to still stay on benefits. Unfortunately, since then, the questions have been coming in, hang on, I went and called this employee back, and they, you know, respectfully declined because they had made other plans, or they wanted to go and do something different, or they were, you know, just admitting that they were gaming or whatever at home and too comfortable to come to work. And I feel like that's a little bit of a different circumstance. I actually was one of the lucky few to get through to Service Canada last week, and I spent some time talking on the phone to them about, you know, how do we handle this? And you know, the person who I spoke with, and I don't know, I think this is an individual choice as an employer, but the person who I spoke with from Service Canada said, if you get notification from Service Canada that an employee has received this benefit and you believe that they have been accepting it falsely, you have the opportunity to comment on the statement. So that was one option that she gave. Personally, I don't know many employers that would opt for that. Most of them are opting for that personal leave, and in some cases adding comments such as employee refused to return on this date, just to sort of tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You know, honestly, the other side of it, I will say, is that keep good notes. Sorry, this is the last thing I'll say. Keep good notes on that, because if you have an employee who is refusing to come into work, I can almost guarantee there'll be 100 other people willing to take that job.
Okay.
And when that employee comes back in 13 weeks asking for their job back and you've rehired.
Sure. That's a good takeaway. I'm going to give you one more chance for a quick takeaway. We are wrapping it up in the next minute or so. We're speaking with Shawnee Love, the founder and lead with LoveHR. Shawnee, thanks very much for joining us. We did promise folks that we'd work in an hour time frame. We started late, so we're going to wrap it up in the next minute or so. If there was one takeaway that you would leave people with, or guidance that you would give, conscious of the clock, what would that be, Shawnee?
I think just to remember that, you know, this too shall pass, and we all want to be thinking about how we want to be known and remembered, and that's where I go back to that relationship piggy bank, and you know, being communicative and talking with your staff and being upfront. I think, you know, this is when leaders really shine. This is what we're born for.
Excellent. Shawnee, thanks very much for your time this morning, and
Pleasure.
you're available if people want to connect with you. How would they
Yes.
connect with you?
Well, certainly LinkedIn. We're avid and active on LinkedIn, and then of course email. My email is just Shawnee, SHAWNEE @lovehr.ca.
Excellent. To wrap things up today, I just want to
Thanks, everyone.
bring back to some the slide deck, and thank you again, Shawnee. So you're still alive, so thanking the group. We
Thank
love
you,
the
everyone.
passion that you bring. Thanks, Shawnee. We're going to follow this session up next week with a little deeper dive into employment and labor law in the wake of COVID with Mark Gravis of Pusher Mitchell. And we're doing this weekly, so we're keeping our team busy here, generating information that's hopefully helpful for our members, including the following Thursday will be how mindfulness can help reduce stress. This would be a great one to bring your team in on. We have our guest speaker. She's been no stranger for us, Iwana Sanenko, with Healthy Transition. So she'll be speaking that. That will be the session in a couple of weeks. On behalf of Shawnee Love and LoveHR and the team here at the Kelowna Chamber, I want to thank you for joining us this morning for Business Smarts Online, and we will hopefully see or talk to you again. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.